1-800-257-1257.
This is CNN.
This is CNN Worldwide Update. News without borders.
A growing political and social crisis in South Africa, blacks living in squalor.
The U.S. Vice President speaks out on growing anti-Japanese sentiment.
And dangers of the deep blue, and look at modern-day efforts to seek and destroy underwater mines.
Welcome. This is Worldwide Update. I'm John DeDakis at the CNN Center in Atlanta.
And I'm Dave Michaels. In about 2 hours, South African President F.W. de Klerk is set to open what could be an historic session of Parliament. Black opposition leaders are demanding a faster transfer of power, and this could be South Africa's final all-white parliament. The nation's Conservative Party is urging whites across South Africa to pray for what it calls God's help. The pro-apartheid Conservative Party is threatening to protest if Mr. de Klerk makes provocative statements during his opening address. CNN will carry live coverage of President de Klerk's opening address to Parliament. That is coming up at 4 a.m. Eastern Time. The government leaders will inherit a political and social crisis, squatter camps for poor blacks that dot South Africa. Cape Town has become the nation's fastest-growing city because of the massive number of people living amid the squalor. Jeremy Thompson reports.
Every morning, the lucky few set off for work in Cape Town, just for a while leaving behind the shacks they call home. But for the majority of blacks, there is no employment, and with no money, little hope of escaping from these sprawling shanty towns. The splendor of nearby Table Mountain remains a distant dream. The beautiful city of Cape Town, with its affluent white suburbs, is now surrounded by massive squatter camps, crammed with black families drawn to the city in search of work and a better life. Each month, several thousand more pour in, only to be trapped in what the government calls informal settlements. Since influx control laws were scrapped, Cape Town's become the fastest-growing city in southern Africa, creating a housing crisis the government simply cannot cope with. Bulldozers used to be the official response to illegal housing, but now the machinery of state is busy laying sewage and water pipes for temporary homes that are fast becoming permanent. Though the rudimentary toilets and taps often serve dozens of families who have no facilities at all in their homemade huts. In Cape Town, 80% of all blacks live in these informal settlements. To residents like Pamela Malaleka, the new South Africa means no more than one day getting a brick home.
Maybe we got the new things. You can't stay with a house like that, one, the brick houses, and the water and the toilet, everything.
But the government claims it hasn't the resources to build houses for poor blacks.
I certainly don't feel satisfied because one realizes the desperate need out there. But I think we're doing the best we can with the means at our disposal.
And that doesn't mean houses?
That certainly doesn't mean houses.
However, several of the government's serviced sites remain empty, boycotted by squatters who reject the facilities as inadequate. They also fear that overcrowded land will lead to more faction fights, which in the past have claimed hundreds of lives. The forlorn toilet blocks now stand as headstones to a failed housing policy. Critics claim the state is struggling to shed the concept of apartheid.
The state is still talking about building black townships on the edges of cities, on land which is still far from the center and so on. And those are just, they're not on. They're just not on for South Africa of the 1990s. It's not on in terms of what people want. They're not the kind of South Africa that people have struggled for.
The outskirts of cities like Cape Town have an increasingly third world look. Across the country, at least 7 million blacks now live in shanty towns, more than the entire white population. A political and social nightmare for whoever governs the new South Africa. Whatever political changes take place, unless a solution can be found to this massive housing crisis, there's little chance of South Africa's cities becoming racially integrated. Jeremy Thompson, ITN, Cape Town.
For the first time ever, China and Israel have established diplomatic ties. The move, announced just hours ago, has been widely expected. China plans to send a delegation to next week's Mideast peace talks, which would not have been allowed if it didn't recognize all the participants. China is a longtime supporter of the PLO, but it's not clear yet what stand China will take at the talks. The U.S. will reopen discussion on Israel's request for $10 billion in loan guarantees Friday. U.S. Secretary of State James Baker is expected to meet with Israeli Ambassador Zalman Shoval, but is not expected to give a final decision. One of the biggest issues blocking the guarantees is Israel's continued settlement of the occupied territories, where, as CNN's Charles Hoff reports, life remains difficult for the Palestinians.
The Palestinian delegates to Middle East peace talks returned home Wednesday, just 1 week before they may leave for Moscow to take part in a multi-nation conference on the region.
We're insisting that Palestinians from the outside should definitely be participating